Camila can also introduce herself a little bit. I actually met Camila here at the MoMA PS1 about
10 years
10
ago.
years ago, literally.
At a MoMA PS1 warm-up party.
Yes.
And the headliner was Pachanga Boys. And it rained.
That was, and it rained, and it was very funny. It was in the summer.
Yeah, it was really fun.
And we're both from Guadalajara, actually, so none of us lived here at that time, so it was a very big coincidence that we were both here at the same time. So maybe Camila, introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi everyone, I'm Camila. I'm friends with Inés, as she already mentioned. We met here. And I am an assistant professor of Latin American literature and culture at Baruch College, at CUNY in Manhattan. And I'm very excited about this because we're bringing together both of our expertise in a kind of like an experimental way. So we'll see how it goes. Please be truthful, be honest at the end.
Okay, so I invited Camila to talk in this project called Mirror Identities about aesthetics in a cross-border context, right? So that came first because of a research that I did called remittance architecture, where I started analyzing from an urban and architectural point of view how this movement of Mexican towards the US and the money that they send back to the country is completely reshaping the aesthetics in the Mexican countryside. So I've been working with that project for a while now, and having these kind of different explorations to see, okay, like this happens with architecture and with urbanism definitely, but what happens in different disciplines? And that's where I thought about Camila, that also works with this kind of like cross-border movements in films, in literature, etc. So we wanted, we dropped a couple of words that we wanted to discuss about it, and we wanted to share with you from our different perspectives. I work more from a built environment, material, aesthetical point of view, and Camila will let you know what she studies when we get there.
It's a surprise.
It's a surprise.
Yeah.
So, first of all, we wanted to like open with what do we talk about when we talk about aesthetics? And I want to give you the floor.
Oh, that's a very big question. But I will not give you the answer yet. I'll let you come to it on your own terms, like I do with my students. And so here, there's Tintan. Does anybody know who Tintan is? Nobody? Okay. I expected that. Tintan was like a movie artist from like the 30s and 40s in Mexico, and here he is dressed in the Pachuco style, which is originally from the border, but like more from the California side of the border. So I chose him here because the set of aesthetic values that Tintan presents is a very good example of how what Inés said, the mirror identities is, works in film and in the star system in general. I feel like we talk a lot about the cultural production that emerges from the diasporas in the US, like Mexicans that migrate to the US, but sometimes we overlook what happens when they come back to Mexico, because there has been a different type of contact there that, opens up ways for, new sets of aesthetics and like way of experimenting with a bunch of things. Obviously, I put this in relation with what Inés does in terms of like material culture and buildings. So I don't know, Inés, I don't want to.
Yeah, no, maybe
it's about
like,
you. So
no, it's about all of us. So when I talk about aesthetics in my research, there's this kind of nuance about what is called aesthetical and what isn't called aesthetical, right? Like there's this kind of moral authorities that can actually categorize something as aesthetic, particularly in architecture. Like what we study in architecture school are like these different movements that have somehow been accepted by history, by theories and everything, and then there are a lot of aesthetic movements that are somehow left out of this kind of like officialization of aesthetics.
And this plays a lot into the low culture, high culture debates, which is, a very sort of like, I'm so tired of that debate. It's very, I feel like it's been used to exhaustion. And that's also why I choose Tintan, because Tintan forms a part of more popular cinematography that for a long time wasn't considered, like good, serious filmmaking because it appealed to the masses, right? So of course in Mexico, as in many places, the influx of like Western perspectives on art meant that people like him weren't thought of as, you know, icons or like, you know, aesthetic paragons of something. And what Inés is mentioning, just to, you know, make an aside, since we're both from Guadalajara, and that's where Luis Barragan is, do you people know who Luis Barragan is? Yes! Luis Barragan is like our own Pritzker Prize of Architecture. And I feel like when people think about Mexican architecture, they only think about Luis Barragan, who has been legitimized by the Pritzker Prize. And when, you know, he has many houses across the country, in Mexico City, Guadalajara, obviously. And it's sort of like the same phenomenon that already happened with other forms of culture and art, with film, with music, with literature, and now we're sort of seeing it with architecture. Am I right?
Yeah, no, 100%. So that's actually a very good example because definitely in Mexico, everything that looks like the architecture that Luis Barragan does, for example.
I'm sorry to bring him up. I know.
No, it's great. But like it's automatically like put into the good kind of architecture, no, the pretty kind of architecture. And then there's all of these other architecture that just like to make a little parenthesis. I don't know how to
I think that's perfect.
In Mexico, there's this program by the Ministry of Tourism that is called the Magical Town. No, so like when you have a city or a village or a small town that are pretty enough, they get this category and they start getting funds from the government. What happens with this? So these towns have to be pretty enough to appear in a postcard and to somehow like fulfill what foreigners are expecting to see in a Mexican village or a Mexican city or a Mexican town. And the thing is that everything else that it's not magical, it's somehow like secluded, and there's no funds that are being sent to all of these other places that are not pretty enough. Obviously pretty in some very very hegemonical standards of what is pretty or what is beautiful. Also very colonial standards, because in the end, many of these towns that are categorized as magical are colonial towns, right? So this is what we are kind of like expecting for the Mexican aesthetics to be.
Yeah, and I think it's important to unpack what we talk about when we talk about pretty or beautiful, right? Because all this, like the postcard town, like places like Sayulita, who is super famous beach town, Tulum, who now is like Disneyland or something. They are pretty, which means they keep some sort of controlled excess of what people associate with Mexican culture. So it's like, you know, a lot of color and fruits and, you know, some sort of like exuberance, but within bounds that are digestible towards people who are going to consume these places or these forms of media or whatever, which are usually, you know, Americans and Europeans. So what happens with, you know, for example, that chair and Tintan's clothing, which again, this is taken from, like his Pachuco suit is taken from like Chicanos in California. It's excessive in a way that is not digestible or like clean enough or sanitized for the arbiters of high taste or high culture. So of course this chair is not in an architecture book, probably. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe that
unless
would
it is in an architectural book from the 17th century, then yes, right?
Yeah.
But then it's this kind of like copy of a copy of a copy through time. And yeah, also these aesthetics, like these remittance aesthetics in particular that I study, that combines styles from the US, from Mexico, from Europe, from Mexico, they are also very symbolically loaded, right? Because a chair like this, I mean, it's elegant, right? It reminds you of the house of, I don't know, Louis XIV in France. So somehow, like, you are communicating something by the aesthetic you choose to have in your house. Yeah, maybe we can.
Also, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt us. It's a classroom, so we shouldn't be lecturing.
Maybe you start with the concept of spillage, because you're the one that mentioned it.
When we were talking about what we were going to talk about for this talk, I didn't come up with it, but there was a word that kept coming into my mind, which was spillage, and more like, it was the best translation that I could find for derrame in Spanish, which is when something, you know, overflows in a way. because I feel like when we're talking about cross-border or trans-border or however you want to put it, aesthetics, we really have to talk about this like movement that, again, is the rupture of a boundary, because in a spillage, there's always the rupture of a boundary, like of a contained form or of a contained aesthetic even. So here on my side, I put an accordion, which might seem absolutely insane, but it's because the accordion, since we're trying to talk about stuff that, you know, sort of echoes Inés's work, the accordion is an instrument that is now fundamental to Mexican music, especially certain genres across the country. And it is an instrument that enters Mexico through the north, through Texas, thanks to German immigrants, right? So what happens in that sort of like sonic movement is that the accordion like literally trespasses the border, and it spills into the other side, creating this sort of like sonic geography that does not respond to like geopolitical divisions. So that is how I'm understanding spillage in this case. Like there is something that is sort of like crossing over to this other side, to this outside, however you want to see it, that then becomes like imbued into the culture of that other place. So like accordions now are, again, very, I would say quintessential Mexican, but very present in Mexico and in other parts of Latin America too. But the fact is that they came because of those exchanges at the border between Tejanos, you know, people who were there before the border existed, and Mexicans on, well, now our side of the border.
I love it. I love it. No, yeah, when Camila talked about this idea of spillage, it made me think of another term that I use when I'm talking about this kind of like cross-border aesthetical movements, that is mimicry. So the theory of mimicry it's a post-colonial term mainly used by Homi K. Bhabha, the sociologist, and he talks about how these power relations between two countries, between two people, always create a phenomenon called mimicry, where the person that is being colonized or that is in the kind of like disadvantaged position in this power relation is gonna somehow mimic what the other person does. So somehow trying to become it in order to transcend it, right? In order to somehow like equal this power relation. So I like using this image, and I also use it in the book, and I always use it in the talks. That is it's a mausoleum in the small village called Vista Hermosa in Mexico. That is a very honest copy of the White House in Washington D.C., right? And it is kind of taking all of these elements, obviously completely out of scale. It's obviously a copy that is trying to mimic something, but it's also very obviously not the thing that it's mimicking, right? So there's always, Bhabha talks about this incompleteness in the mimicking process that actually creates a whole new identity through it. So I feel like these kind of things that permeate to the other side, that spill to the other side of the border from the US, are somehow like trying to copy things that are in the US, but then without wanting completely to be the thing that it's copying. So it becomes something else. It creates a whole new movement. It creates a whole new object.
I mean, I think that here, something that might be, useful for the analysis, and I hate to bring it up because I feel like everybody does, but it's the idea of Nepantla, of the third space, that Anzaldúa talks in her book, Borderlands, right? Because there is a mimicry, even like a pantomime, like there are some theatrics about it, but it's not trying to replicate exactly that other thing. Instead, it's creating a secret third thing. Well, not secret, but it's creating a third space where this new like signifiers can exist on their own. It's really hard to talk about cross-border aesthetics, whatever they might be, without falling into a comparison. Like, what looks like what? Is it, like, we talk a lot about authenticity, right? Is it authentic or not? And I feel like thinking about it in terms of a third space allows us to think about it in its own terms without comparing it to another thing, like making it seem like a replica of something else, like a failed copy of something else, right? But I love that.
Yeah, at the same time, I feel like when you try to copy something, it's never going to be the same because it came from you and not from the person that actually built the thing that you're copying, you know? And there's also like, it's impossible for us that when we are copying something, we're also putting part of ourselves inside of it, and that already makes it a whole different product. And I think that can get us to the next topic, which is matter, no? Because we were talking about how aesthetics is this kind of like very ambiguous thing, and then at the same time we are talking about literal objects and physical things that we can touch that embody this kind of aesthetic. So yeah, maybe that can be a separate. Yeah.
I struggled a little bit with this one, but because I was trying to think about, since when Inés and I were talking initially, we were trying to think about the material implications also related to like geography, like where material is extracted, where like the type of material that we have access to. And when I tried to bring it into my own work, which of course I'm a literature scholar, so it was like paper, like it was just like a hard stretch, you know? But then I thought about something that I learned during there was this exhibition at the Met, the Mexican Vanguard prints. I don't know if anybody saw it, Taller de Gráfica Popular. It was very good. And they talked about the materials that muralists used. So I was like, maybe there's something there. Again, I was trying to think about stuff that belongs to this sort of idea of the national character of Mexico that has, without us knowing, an influence from these cross-border movements. So I came up with the Duco paints, which were used for in what's the word for fabrica? Factories and industrial settings, and a lot of muralists used them, but they had to import them from the U.S. So I don't know, I'm not an expert in art history or painting or whatever, but I think it speaks of a very interesting sort of movement and exchange too, because of course painting and visual media is intimately related to these exchanges in ways that we sometimes forget. And muralism now is one of these great Mexican vanguards and very nationalist in its spirit of even anti-Yankee or whatever. And thanks to migration and to these patterns that were happening already in the 40s and 50s, they were using these paints, which I think is honestly kind of fascinating because I'm a nerd. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I love it because I think what I'm gonna say is kind of like the opposite of it. Like somehow, these murales that are super Mexican, they're made with all of these US materials.
Sure,
somehow.
yeah.
And then at the same time, all of these remittance houses, all of these columns and all of these vaults and all of these elements that are in the houses of the people the Mexicans who migrated to the US that they built back in Mexico. They're not gonna import a column from Washington, right? They're gonna have to see how to build it with what they have in Mexico. So it's a foreign symbol, but it's built with everything that you have in hand. Mm-hmm. And then I think that's also very interesting because maybe you're gonna build it with Adobe, because that's what you have in your town. So suddenly you have a very fancy column, but it's built with Adobe. Mm-hmm. And then what's up with that column? Is it Mexican or is it American or is it European? Because you're building it with your hands, and in the end it belongs to the place where it has been produced, right? So yeah, I somehow feel that you're copying something, but then you're making it your own. You're appropriating it 100%. So I feel, maybe that gives it the right to be Mexican at the same time, because it was built there by the artisans there, by the craftsmen of the small town. So I don't know what belongs where. It belongs to the U.S. at the same time. Like the painting belongs to the U.S., but the murals belong in Mexico, and maybe the column belongs in the U.S. but the person who built it is in Mexico with its Mexican hands and its Mexican materials. So I feel like...
Yeah, I feel like the interesting thing about this is that it sort of destabilizes the idea of national identities as a fixed thing, right? We're trying to anchor it in one particular place, is it Mexican? It's a question that you could ask of, I don't know. I was talking to a friend the other day on a podcast about Mexican cinema, and we were talking about Guillermo del Toro and all these Oscar winners, and it's okay, so if Mexican cinema is made by Mexicans, is Gravity a Mexican film? Did y'all see Gravity with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney? It's a space movie. Right. So I mean, Alfonso Cuarón made that movie and he won an Oscar for it. He's Mexican as us. And is that a Mexican movie because he made it? Like, it just, I feel like the question sort of like implodes when we look at it from that perspective. And the same could be said about a lot of movies, right? You know, we have like production houses that give money for the studios to make the movies, whatever. But I feel like it's sort of the same. Like, if a Mexican artist made it, but with these materials, but it's copying something, like, then where does it belong? Is it American? Is it like fronterizo? Is it Chicano? Is it? So I think that is like a very, I think it's a good thing that it's a generative possibility to think about how identity can also be a cage, you know, and how we're able to, like, you know, think outside of the bounds of the nation state, because we're very used to thinking about ourselves and the world in those terms. And I don't know, I think that there's a lot to be explored there.
100%. And I also feel like if people can belong to many places at the same time, then objects and movements, they can also be kind of like geographically located in many places, or like dislocated somehow.
I want to ask you also, because I feel like it has to do with this topic that we're talking about, because all of this responds to like economic measures and to, like, you know, probably like neoliberalism and I don't know, like, you know, remesas and migratory patterns. So can you have you in your work explored how it's related to, like, you know, this economic you know, issues that are going on, or like
I mean, there's different levels in that, because first of all, when we talk about architecture with remittances, it means that it was built by people who had to abandon their home country. I mean, in this particular case, Mexico, to come to the US, right? And I think the mere fact that they had to risk their lives crossing the border, because most of them, they cross in an unregular way, whatever that means. And they have to work a lot of years to be able to actually build some kind of heritage in their own house. And that's only because they didn't have the opportunities to do that in their own country. The economic opportunities, but sometimes also the political opportunities, and also they were pushed out because of violence in our country. That happens a lot. And I think that already, like, really says a lot about this kind of power relation between Mexico and the US, right? Like, we need to come here to actually make a better living, to live the American dream, and then be able to have a house in our hometown. So I think that already puts us as like strong, not us, because that was not my case, but the people who do that, they puts them in a bit of a victim position in front of the whole neoliberal American dream and everything. But at the same time, I don't want to take away the power of them being able to create a better life for themselves, right? And to aspire to have better economical possibilities, so they can actually leave something better for their families and have an actual physical heritage, because the houses here, they become more than a shelter, right? The houses here are an embodiment of this kind of like life, I don't know, like a better life that they built throughout their lives. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, in the end, everything has to do with how you display how better your life got. But at the same time, I mean, it's very valid, you know, like if you had to work 40 years to build a house and you want your house to be completely like show off, I think they have the right to exist, and they have the right to display that. If it falls into a very capitalistic way to display wealth and to aspire to have wealth, yeah, it definitely does. But
oh yeah, like this is not at all a moral judgment on aesthetics, or it's just more like what I'm trying to think about is how, you know, even the aesthetic of remesas, of remittances, is also a symptom of this like displacement created by neoliberalism, right? So what people have to do to survive within those systems, I'm not gonna judge that, right?
100%.
But it's like this has sort of like an economic sort of anchorage.
100%.
It's not just something that, oh yeah, it happened, and then this place of wealth and of a better life, of betterment, and of I don't know, like exuberance
Social
and like
mobility, yeah.
right. It's a way to like showcase that, and that's
Exactly.
perfectly fine.
And honestly,
right?
that brings me to our next word, which was archiving. And I think that's that's a book, yeah. And I think that's very important because all of these houses, they also become an archive of what is happening. So in general, everything we build as humans, it's an archive of what we are going through as a society. No? That I teach a class at the UNAM in Mexico City that is called the Mirror Cities. And it's about how everything that we study in history of architecture and urbanism, it's literally telling you what was happening there at that time. Because what we build and what we decide to not build too, it's also telling something, right? So here, the remittance houses and all of the built environment that is being modified and transformed by the migrants, it's completely telling us what is going on with the world, right? Like all of these power relations with the US, all of these like neoliberal conditions that are pushing people to migrate to other places, what they live there, what they live here, everything is somehow like mirrored into the space. And yeah, what I was wondering is how does that work also in other disciplines, in the ones that you studied? Because I feel like, yeah, the built environment, it's a very clear mirror if you know how to look at it. Or if you, not even if you know how to, you just stop and ask and analyze, you can understand the story and you can understand the Mexican context or the Mexican-American context. And I think that's what makes it very valuable, and that's why it's worth archiving, because there's not so much archiving of this kind of non-Luis Barragan architecture, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a faux pas to understand literature, at least, but many other things, without taking into account the context in which it's produced, right? Like, I feel like sometimes we utilize fiction to narrate like otherwise unsayable realities. And in Mexico, there are many of those. Like right now, there's a lot of shit going on, sorry. So thinking about that, I thought about something that I would have to do more explicitly with the US. And there are many examples of this, obviously, but I chose this book cover, which is a novel by Yuri Herrera. Yuri Herrera is from the north, I think, of Mexico. He's a professor in Tulane, and he wrote this book which is about, he did a bunch of like archival work to write it, even though it's sort of like, you know, historical fiction, about the time Benito Juarez, who was our like first and only indigenous president, went to New Orleans, and you know, sort of like the things that happened to him being there. And I thought about it as an archival gesture, because even though it's a novel, it's not, you know, sort of, it's not a transcript of something or like a newspaper article, or the things that we think about when we think about archives are more like official documents, right? I think this functions as some sort of like archival like praxis, like trying to talk about a moment in Benito Juarez who was like, you know, a national icon. Like he's in the, I think he's in 2 bills now, 20 pesos and 500, I don't know. Anyway, he's everywhere. But it's a part of his life that is like, has not been explored a lot. And I believe that, you know, fiction and this sort of writing can help us archive these things, because of course, archives are political. And the things that archivists decide to recover and to keep and to safeguard are also creating a void of other kinds, right? To give you an example of this, again talking about the Mexican case, in the National Film Archive in Mexico, there's a huge gap of a period of cinema from the 70s that was very cheap and very like produced en masse, cine de ficheras. Because, you know, the powers that be don't think that is, I think it's a school of filmmaking, but you know, I can argue about that if you want, like we can have a discussion. It's not worthy of being housed in the National Archive, right? Like it's not high cinema, like it doesn't express a national soul. And again, we enter into these discussions of what is identity? What does it mean to be Mexican? Like there are certain things that we are allowed to be as Mexicans, and others that we're not, and others that, you know, there's this like sort of like floating part of identity that we can perform sometimes, some other times we shouldn't. And anyway, to get back to the point, like I feel like this is a very good example of how fiction and you know, artistic creation can also work as a sort of archive, even if it's not an actual, you know, file of documents.
Yeah, 100%. There's something that I also wanted to point out when we're talking about in Mexican culture what is being archived and what isn't. And I think class really plays a super important role there. Now, like we know that Mexican society is a very classist society, and many popular movements. How do you call that? ¿Se dice popular? Like, sí. Like, I don't know, if these movements are pretty, and again, can be in a postcard and can be interesting for foreigners to somehow like exotize or like to make it look very folklorical and beautiful, then it's archived. And if it's like very beautiful and exuberant and everything that falls into the common hegemonical aesthetics, then it's also gonna be archived. But everything that is in the middle, it's gonna be left out. Like what you were saying about these kind of movies from the 70s and so on, and about all of this kind of architecture, because it's not pretty enough to be kind of like this kind of exotic, beautiful to put in a postcard. It's not like technical enough to be part of what you learn in architecture school or in art school, but it's left in the middle, and that part that is left in the middle that is very raw. I mean, Mexico is a country where 70% of the housing and of the public space is self-built. All that part that is self-built, that is raw, it's being left out of archives, and that's the part that is actually telling you what most of the population think, feel, aspire to, and are and live like. No, so
right, and I mean that's a phenomenon that also extends to film, obviously, and I think a lot about telenovelas, for example, which, you know, telenovelas, I mean, now they're not produced as much as they were at some point, but yes, they're cheap, and, you know, they extol this sort of like very sexist, very classist, very racist values. I'm not disputing any of that, but people watch them a lot, and for a long time, you know, academics and intellectuals didn't want to look at them because they weren't like worthy enough of analysis, of critical thinking. I mean, I think things are changing in that respect, but of course, like everybody knows telenovelas, and yet people don't think about them as something that is intimately related to our cultural repertoire in a way that is, you know, exportable. And again, I want to double down on the word palatable, because I think all of this has to do, like the postcard, the idea of the postcard has to do with consumption, and consumption from people that come from other parts of the world, mainly white people, Americans and Europeans. So I think that's important to keep into account, like all this archiving of like Barragán and Díaz Morales and all these like modernist architects. People love that and they eat that up because it doesn't look Mexican, but it also is Mexican because it's pink, right? So there's also this very basic, very sort of boring approach to what it means to be Mexican again. Like very, yeah, like one-dimensional.
Which can bring us to our last keyword, which is identity.
Ooh. My favorite.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for the last one, I wanted to use an image of one of the remittance houses that I referred to in the book, where I think it's a very raw example of a very Mexican small town house in the lower floor, and then in the upper floor you have like a cabin that could be found in a small town in Colorado somehow. This family migrated to Colorado, which is like very cute somehow, because it's a very literal reproduction of this kind of like cross-border situation, cross-border life, cross-border identity, where they are Mexican, but at the same time they live for a very long time in Colorado. So it makes sense that the houses in Colorado also feel like home to them, and they wanted to bring this house and put it on top of their Mexican house, and then have this kind of like the whole family living in this dual kind of identity
Is
that
it
is
a
embodied in the
duplex?
house.
Is it 2 houses or is it
No,
just one house?
it's just one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No. So on my side, I chose this movie, Nulo Mixteco. Anybody seen it? I think it's on HBO Max, I think. So it's made by a director called Angeles Cruz. She's an indigenous woman, queer woman. And it's not so much, I chose this not so much because of the form of the film, like the technical aspects of the film, but more about the portrayal of the people in the film. So the movie is about essentially 3 people that return from the US after migrating there. They're indigenous too. I think they're Zapotec. And one of them, I think the woman up top, she's a lesbian, and then there's another one that left his family behind and was sending them money to build their houses. And then, I forget the third one, but I chose it because I feel like this is another one of those examples that destabilizes identity. One, because, again, we don't often think in, of course this is it's a generalization, but we don't think in cultural production a lot about people who return to Mexico after having migrated to the US. But also because these are indigenous people who are, have been systematically sort of expelled from citizenship. Like, this is, indigenous communities in Mexico are a very good example of how they're used in postcards, like, oh, come look at them. But in, the official discourses of the nation, they're not, model citizens, right? Some of them don't speak Spanish, which is something that, people from Mexico police Mexican Americans hear a lot about. Like, oh, he doesn't speak Spanish, but he looks more Mexican than me. Like, I've heard that so many times, when I'm teaching or even with my friends, which is crazy because then what are the bounds of identity? So in this movie, I think what Angeles Cruz approached in a very interesting way and rather unexplored way is what happens with this convergence of identities when they come back to their small town in Mexico. How do people relate to that? How do people relate to an indigenous lesbian woman who then takes a lover in the small town, which is, not sort of accepted or whatever. And again, it's destabilizing to the ways we think about identity. In the same way I think that these houses are, they're very, they sort of again, implode what we think about when we think about Mexicanidad or Mexicanness.
100%. Yeah, no, I don't know. I think it's that. I would like to close it like that and then maybe open a round of questions so we have time to talk with the people and make it a classroom and not so much a lecture as you said. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has a thought, a question, a remark or something that you want to share.
A disagreement.
A disagreement also. Always invited.
No! Hola.
Hi. Sorry, I haven't read the book or seen your research. But to me, I grew up in Mexico, rural Mexico. And seeing this is very, like you guys said, these houses and this architecture is disruptive to the rest of the town and, the moral judgments again. And I see this a lot in rural Mexico. But my question is, how do you see all of these things that we talked about, aesthetics, architecture, how do you see them materialized in the larger cities? Because that exists too, this architecture of remesas and this economy. I bet that that also happens in the larger cities. But what are some aspects, or how do you see this translates into the larger cities where there isn't much space to build, or the financial ability to buy in the city?
Yeah, no, that's a good question actually, and I decided to focus in rural Mexico for a couple of reasons. So technically in cities, you have way more regulations, right? First of all, heritage regulations, so you cannot just tear down an old house and then build a kind of a White House, wannabe, I don't know, Las Vegas, Bellagio, or whatever, because there are some rules that you have to follow. I think this is a phenomena that happens way more in the periphery and in the countryside, because of the lack of attention and the lack of regulation, right? So I don't have the book here at the fair, you can find it in printed matter, but I have a zine that is called Non-Magical Towns, which refers to these actual towns, and what I talk about is the freedom with which these houses are built. So in a small town, nobody's gonna come and tell you that your house cannot have 5 floors next to a house that only has 1, you know? Or that it can be like extremely green and then next to it everything is kind of like, I don't know, brown. It doesn't matter, nobody's gonna tell you you can't. So I think it's this kind of like lack of regulation and freedom that makes it way more visible in the periphery and in the countryside, because in the cities you are more constrained also in a matter of space. Maybe you cannot build a house, you're gonna have to live in an apartment. And you cannot get so funky in an apartment because you have neighbors on top or underneath, right? So I think that's why in the cities it's not so much visible. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. Of course, like a lot of people that migrate are also city inhabitants. Yeah, and also I think in the countryside it's way more visible because it's not only in the houses, it also spills in the public space. Like in the particular town that I'm talking about, the migrants created patronages, like they had these groups where they paid for the sports facilities, they paid for the town square. Every time they needed to paint the delegación, like the Mary, I don't know where the mayor lives.
City Hall.
The city hall, thank you. They were the ones that painted it, and by being the ones that paid for the painting, they were also the ones that chooses which color the painting is, right? So that suddenly they also get a lot of leverage in being able to choose what is going to happen to the town. So suddenly you see that also the public space transforms, and that's also thanks to the money that is being sent by the migrants. But in the city it's harder because, you know, if somebody comes and tells you that, okay, I want to paint the Mexico City Hall in green and I'm going to give you this money, wait, we cannot receive money from you, you know, like it becomes way more complicated. So that's why the actual the actual remittances are not so easy to see translated into the built environment of cities. I think if that sort of answers your question. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, thank you both for the discussion. I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on how the internet plays a part in accelerating this sort of process of influence and sort of co-opting looks and styles that everybody can witness now, and how that kind of creates this sort of globalization and homogenization. Maybe you can talk about that.
Maybe I can talk from the architecture perspective, and maybe afterwards you can tell a bit of a broader view on it. It has a lot to do. Like when I was doing this research, I was studying at the Technical University in Berlin, and I had colleagues from pretty much everywhere around the world. I had colleagues from Turkey, from Ghana, from China, and when I showed the houses for the first time of my research, they were all like, oh my god, this is exactly like the houses in my hometown. So obviously we all have we all have kind of the same references in that sense, no? Like there's a lot of people that look up to the United States, obviously, and then there's all of these kind of European idea of these, I don't know, like Renaissance style that is supposed to be very fancy, or the Tuscany in Italy. And I feel like these references, obviously they travel everywhere, no? They travel in movies, they travel in magazines. Like for example, one of the women that I was interviewing for this project, she built her living room and the staircase that took her to her room, inspiring the Titanic, because the Titanic was her favorite movie, right? And everybody can see the Titanic. Doesn't matter if you're in Mexico, or if you're in China, if you're in Australia. Everybody can see it and everybody can get inspired by that. So obviously that kind of like globalization in the media that we consume is gonna 100% influence what we build too. So suddenly things are very similar everywhere around the world. That's why the guys from Ghana were also saying like, oh my god, that really also looks like, the remittance architecture it's being built in my country. But if you look closely, you will find a lot of things that belong to the particular place, no? Because people from Ghana are going to build it with the materials that they have there. And they're going to include some stuff that are part of their national identity, same as in Mexico. I don't know, like you have these houses, but at the same time, you maybe have an outdoors kitchen. Because in Mexico, we have very good climate in many areas, and you can build outside. And a big comal to make tortillas needs to be outside too. So you're not going to give up on that completely, even though you may have a whole built-in kitchen inside. But if you look closely in all of these things that are like all of this globalization that is spreading and that is changing the built environment, it's never going to do it completely, because I do believe that we're never going to completely lose a sense of identity from the place that we're in. That's my take on it. But now, you go.
I feel like I have a lot to cover, so I'm gonna just talk about 2 examples. And one of them, and this is, for example, I think when I see it a lot, and I know an anecdote doesn't explain a phenomenon necessarily, but I think it might be a symptom of something. And I've seen, for example, among my students who are like, younger people that are more heavy users of TikTok and I don't know, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever. For example, their approach to poetry, and I think it's really influenced now by like this Ruki Kaur sort of thing, which is, the way I see it is, it's a form of poetry that works very well in English, because English is very like quick and fast-paced, and it has a certain rhythm. And when you translate that to Spanish, which is a very florid, sort of like Baroque language, I think it doesn't really do the same thing, but the technique is there. And I feel like I see it a lot because it's very easy to consume. You just post it in your story, you see it. And I feel like a lot of people who are trying to write poetry now, like younger people, which I think is a good thing. I think people should write poetry. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't write poetry. Please write poetry. Are trying to mimic that. Which then some people call it diaspora poetry too, because Rupi talks a lot about her heritage, and then we have a lot of Latinx poets like Jessica Salgado who have sort of like adapted it to like Spanglish. But I think that's definitely a very good example of how this exchanges across social media have, at least from what I can see, have impacted like creation in that regard. Another thing that I think about, and this has more to do with TikTok and the way it makes songs viral, is precisely that, like the patterns of consumption of music. Like, to me is very impressive the way, for example, I see my students teach me about this. Like, I'm not on TikTok because I'm too old and too confused by it, but how they are exposed to a lot of different types of music that, I'm gonna sound like an old fart, but like back in my day, you had to be like in some weird forum on like 4chan or Reddit, and then like download a virus into your computer looking for that song. And now they're just like, yeah, I saw it on a TikTok. And I think that's great. I think that's pretty cool. And then the way when they make music, there has been sort of like a homogenizing, I don't know, like trap beats are very cool and hot right now. And I think that has to do a lot with TikTok. I'm not an expert on that, so this is just something that I can see from afar. But it's, I think it sort of speaks to your question. I think. I don't know. You will tell me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really love the format. And maybe this is a stupid question, but I was wondering if the format allows you to speak precisely about these topics.
The format.
The format of the dialogue, the keywords. It is related to the content of it.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we want it to be like very binary contrasting, which is maybe not great, but at the same time just to like trigger some ideas, because I mean we really know each other, so we knew that we were gonna be just chatting about it. I know what she does, she knows what I do, so Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it would have been really cool if we could actually show examples, you know, if I could show you like Tintan dancing. Because I feel like we're dealing with like a lot of like big words and big topics here that, you know, just saying like, oh, and there's this, and next slide. It's probably not the best, but we had only an hour and a lot of, I mean, we're talking for like an hour when we planned this. So yeah, I mean, what's your suggestion?
Yeah, it's there are many topics that you have.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Already to-
I think it would have been interesting to maybe make more space for the encounters of these things, you know, but yeah, there's a lot to say for sure.
If you don't have any other question, comment, remark, yeah, I think we can close the talk for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.